Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Orlando and we're going to talk about how do you raise rents and do it the right way, guys. It is so important because you don't want to lose tenants, do you? So we're going to talk about the best ways to do it, why you would raise rents and other things like that, so that when you actually do raise rents, and you always should, every year you should be looking at raising rents because it needs to, combat inflation, it needs to combat extra expenses, and so on. So number one is I need you to think about, why are you exactly raising rents other than just raising rents? Are you raising rents because the utility costs are going up, the property management is going up, property taxes are going up, HOA fees are going up? You get where I'm going with this. What is the exact reason? Let me just give you an example. I owned a 4-unit, and in that 4-unit, I pay all of the utility costs. Now, a lot of times people will be like, man, that's a lot to keep up with as far as paying the utility costs. But what I do is, you cannot charge people utility costs if it's all kind of bundled up together, and you cannot split them into units, metered, right? So when I bought this property, I knew that was an issue. So what I decided to do was I decided to break down the utility costs to each tenant based on the amount of living space that they have. So for example, XYZ, let's say a 3-bedroom would have $150 utility costs versus, a studio would have $50. That's just an example. That's not the actual numbers, but that's the example of what I'm using. But you see how it's broken down that way. And every year, if the utility costs went up, I increased the rent, and it got spread all the way across. And I needed to make sure that the utility cost wasn't going so crazy that it wasn't covered in the rent. And so I did that. I made sure that I increased the rent based on the utility costs. Another thing is the property taxes are high in Illinois, so you have to combat that. Every year I will get a new tax bill and it will increase. I can promise you that. It will always increase. So instead of me taking on the burden of that increase, I will also include that into the increase of rent when it comes to that property based on the increase of property taxes, because that is a cost that's going to be bared to me. It needs to be paid in the rent. So you need to figure out, why am I increasing these rents? It makes it so much easier when deciding to raise rents when you have an actual reason to raise rents. Nobody wants to raise rents on, a senior citizen living in your unit when you're just raising them just to raise them. Oh, I'm just going to raise it $50 just because I just want to raise it $50. No, if you have a reason to do it, it makes it so much easier, guys. And then when it comes to, based on what we were talking about, raising those rents based on the property management, things of that nature, you need to break down to see exactly what it would take for you to get those things covered. Now, you may not be able to cover it all because the rent increase may be crazy. It may be crazy. So you have to really determine what works out best for you. Once again, in my market, raising the rent by, $50, $60, stuff like that, it's really not a good idea. But it may be a good idea in Atlanta. It may be a good idea in Tennessee or New York or California. I don't know, but in my market area, raising rents by, over $50, it starts, especially with a tenant that's already in there, it gets a little finicky. So you want to really, really make sure. I think I looked at rent.com and it said from 2011 to 2016, rents went up by 12.5%. So if you kind of break it down there, you can kind of see where rents were in your market will go. One of the things that I love to do is, if you go to like apartments.com or use Rentometer or something like that, you can see exactly where your rents are. And then you need to try to figure out how you're going to accomplish that without scaring off your tenants. So, and then number 3, you need to decide when you're going to raise rents. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, I'm going to raise rents, I don't know, 30 days before I'm given a new lease. Or sometimes they don't even give the the tenant a heads up. They just say, here's a new lease, and then the tenant sees the rent increase. And that's most likely how most landlords do it. But I always say you want to give your tenant a 90-day period of letting them know, hey, the rents are going to be raised and this is exactly what it's going to cost. So at that point, it's not a situation where the tenant is caught off guard. The tenant can then let you know in advance, I'm not going to be renewing and I'm going to be vacating the unit. So then it gives you a head start on trying to find a new tenant in that building. But if you go ahead and as soon as you hand them the new lease, it has the new rental rate on there and it's something that they don't agree with, they are just not gonna renew and you're gonna be left trying to fill that gap. You won't get that head start that you want. So 90 days, guys, 90 days is what I suggest. I suggest 90 days. That's enough time for you to find someone else and for them to let you know that they're not going to be living in that unit anymore. But here's the thing, you guys know that I am a big advocate of property management. Property management will do this for you. They will automatically stay on top of the tenant, give them a 90-day notice, make sure they do all of those things for you as far as advertising, things of that nature, and do all of that for that, whatever they charge, 6 to 10% of the rent. It is so worth it because I don't have to do all of that work, stay on top of all of these dates, get all the emails from the tenants and all that other stuff. It could be a lot, especially if you have a lot of units. It's just not worth it. I can understand maybe if you had one property and you wanted to do that, but if you have multiple properties, it becomes too much. I mean, for me, even on my first one, I was just like, I need to put my time somewhere else, and I hired a property management, and I've been doing that for my entire career of owning properties and being a real estate investor. So I would tell you to look into that because I promise you it will be well worth your time. Spend your time looking for properties and getting properties under contract and adding to your portfolio rather than managing properties, which can be tough, dealing with all the nuts and bolts and screws that come along with managing property. So if that's for you, if you want to do that, please go ahead and do that. But if you don't, like I said, property management is where it's at. And the reason why this is so important, especially if you're managing it yourself, is you want to try to reduce as many complaints as possible. Why are you raising the rents? If you have a reason of why you're raising them, you can communicate that to the tenant. Not that tenants really care that property taxes went up and all that other stuff. You have the ammunition if needed be. You want to really try to reduce those complaints as much as possible, especially if you are running the property yourself. Then, you know, people will go online and you don't want them to give you bad reviews and stuff because that stuff really does affect. But also remember, guys, complaints are based on how they feel about living in the property. If you are a landlord who keeps up on the maintenance, if you're a landlord who, you know, when they call for emergency maintenance, or you make sure the upkeep on the property is nice on the outside and things of that nature, it's a lot easier for a tenant to absorb that increase than if you were a slumlord raising the rents and not doing anything. You understand what I'm saying? It's just a lot easier for tenants. And so if they're happy, the less complaints overall you will get. So once again, guys, I hope you got value out of this content. I need you to watch this next video so you can get into your first rental property, guys. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.